Welcome to our RCR Research webinar titled The Rapidly Increasing Demand for Mobile Bandwidth. My name is John Scarborough, and I'm a Vice President with Arden Media Company. Arden Media is the publisher of RCR Wireless News, in addition to the leading niche job boards telecomcareers.net and itjobs.net. Today we're excited to bring you another installment of our RCR Research webinar series. We launched RCR Research to provide in-depth primary market research, analysis, and forecast for the wireless industry. If you haven't had a chance to visit the website, you should check it out at rcrwireless.com/research. We offer several ways to access the original research, including reports, shorter briefs, and annual subscriptions to each of 5 intelligence areas. These intelligence areas include smart devices, 3G, 4G networks, applications and content, the wireless cloud, and mobile security. The analysts are continually working to keep the research current, so we encourage you to visit the site often to see the latest from RCR Research. Moving on to today's topic, I'm grateful that Matthew Vartabedian has joined us for today's webinar to walk us through mobile bandwidth demand. Additionally, RCR Wireless News editor Dan Meyer is on the call to help us out with the question and answer portion of the webinar. Our format, as always, will be a 45-minute presentation followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Questions can be, and we encourage them, submitted at any time during the session by using the questions function on your GoToWebinar control panel. We have a large group here today again, but we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. For those of you that have not attended our past webinars with Matt, let me tell you a little more about Matt Vartabedian. A Vice President of IGR's Wireless and Mobile Communications Research Group, Mr. Vartabedian covers all areas of wireless and mobile, but of late has been focused on smartphones, including form factors, operating systems, and platforms. Prior to joining IGR in November of 2002, Matt was senior editor with Telecom Business, a telecommunications trade magazine. Matt, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us again today.
Thanks, John. Well, before I get started on the topic of today, which is bandwidth demand worldwide and our model and forecast related to that particular topic, I wanted to mention a few more reports that have been posted up to the site in recent weeks. We now have a 2G and 3G wireless subscriber forecast that's available through the site, providing both worldwide numbers and regional views. We're working on a handset forecast as well. That'll provide the same global view as well as the regional breakdowns, and also a 4G subscriber forecast as well that'll provide a similar level of detail. And all that stuff can be accessed through the RCR Research site. So kind of jumping into today's material, and actually I should mention before I get started that the report upon which this particular webinar is based will be available by the end of the week on the site as well. But to get started with today's material, those of you who had perhaps attended Ian Gillett's smartphone presentation a few weeks ago, this slide might look familiar. And the reason why I stole it from him was basically to emphasize kind of this ongoing collision that's occurring in the wireless space between the increasingly powerful cell phones, feature phones, messaging devices, smartphones, and the decreasing size and continued functionality of desktop PCs, notebooks, sub-notebooks, smart books, connected netbooks, readers and tablets, and all those kinds of good things that are perhaps more top of mind of late than usual. And of course, Android-based devices will be coming out in later months, and Windows devices in kind of that tablet form factor as we move forward. But kind of the point here is that as all of these devices increase in power, bandwidth demand, bandwidth usage is going to increase as well. And again, this is another slide from Ian's presentation, but what I wanted to emphasize here was, again, that the demand for mobile data is kind of increasing at a pretty strong rate, and a lot of that is being driven by smartphone penetration, which currently is about 7% of global subscribers and rising, according to our forecast, to about 22% by 2014, and that's worldwide. That's obviously the penetration rates. The growth rates vary. based on the given markets. And it's not just smartphones that are driving demand for mobile data. It's USB dongles, embedded modules in a variety of devices, and that sort of thing. But what is, what do we see as kind of the key drivers of mobile demand, bandwidth demand currently? Today, it's kind of the stuff that we've talked about so far. And just as a quick aside here, I should mention that all of these slides preceding the actual numbers that comprise the forecast and the estimate that we've put together are kind of should be viewed as kind of inputs into the model that we used. So these are all factors that kind of taken together kind of led us to develop the model and the usage profiles that we based the numbers upon. But I'll get to that in a bit. So today, bandwidth demand pretty much worldwide is being driven by smartphones, PC cards, which are, of course, decreasing in usage a bit, USB dongles, modules that are embedded in laptops, tablets, what have you, and also the upgrading of current 3G networks or 2G networks to 3G, as well as the, kind of the 3.5G, so to speak, upgrades to like HSPA+, as well as the rollouts of WiMAX by hundreds of operators around the world and in the U.S. By Clearwire, as well as the gradual shift to LTE here in the U.S. and also around the world. And of course, there's also all of the various applications that folks are using on their smartphones and other mobile devices that kind of drive that bandwidth, one of which is social networking, as well as other types of connected apps and web surfing, IM, email, all those kinds of usual suspects. And in terms of what's going to continue driving bandwidth demand in the next year, 2 years, 3-year time frame, we're really looking at expanded form factors, new form factors kind of along the lines of the collision that I had mentioned earlier, as well as kind of the movement of content to take advantage of the capabilities of the new form factors, kind of the tablet thing where you can get your, the Kindle model where you can get books pushed to you, magazines, newspapers, those types of things, and more interactive content as well that could leverage the larger screens, the processing power, and all those things that are associated with the newer types of devices. Handheld gaming devices, of course, is another way that users might end up using more mobile data. Machine-to-machine communications, whether it's via home automation or smart grids or some other kind of more industrial type applications, will also consume bandwidth on cellular networks. MeeGo, that's referenced here, is the new, I think they call it a multimedia computing device platform that's not really a smartphone OS. It's designed more for in-car uses, mobile computing devices, kind of this new category of device that's coming out, and it's the result of a partnership between Nokia's Maemo effort and Intel's Moblin, and it's been rolled up and bundled up into the Linux Foundation for further management and development. Mobile medical is another area which kind of bears some watching. This could be anything from alerting to prescription refills via your device to a doctor viewing X-rays on his or her handheld half the world away from where the image was actually taken. So, these are some of the drivers that we're seeing, and to try and drill a little bit more down into the actual applications that are being used or the functionality of the devices, the expectation increasingly is that whatever I'm doing on my desktop computer or laptop computer, I want to do the same type of activities on my phone or tablet or whatever kind of device. It's how I choose to consume the content that that I like. I like to view, I like to read, I like to watch, whatever. I want to be able to do it in a manner that fits my circumstance or the devices that I have or what have you. And I don't think there's really any big surprises when it comes to the types of applications driving mobile data usage. It's YouTube, it's TV shows and movies, it's mobile TV. So a lot of this is still mostly side-loaded, but there is some activity over mobile data networks, obviously. The downloading of podcasts and music, streaming audio, internet radio, for example. Pandora has gotten, I think, hugely popular, and that's a big data-heavy app, so to speak. And then, of course, we have all the other usual suspects of email and web browsing and those types of applications. The one key point here is that very small changes in how users use a particular service, per day, per week, per month, what have you, can have a pretty big impact on their overall monthly consumption of mobile data. And in terms of what limits adoption, what limits uptake of these various applications, it comes down to pricing and data caps on the plans, which we'll talk about in a minute, as well as the capabilities of devices, which, as I had mentioned earlier, are increasingly powerful. I think at this stage, if anybody's seen the HTC Evo 4G and the Samsung Galaxy S and the Nexus One and various other devices along those lines, it's a gigahertz processor is pretty much table stakes right now. And the big 4-inch screens and the vibrant colors and multi-touch capabilities, all those types of things help ease consumption of the data that's being downloaded, but also make folks more interested in actually using their device for that particular activity. And that's going to be limited, of course, by battery life, the ease of use of the OS, and there's no shortage of OSs in the market currently. On a more market-based level, kind of the prepaid, postpaid mix in given regions will also affect how users use mobile data, and also content availability. And this point is really more toward BitTorrents, peer-to-peer type file sharing. And what's referenced here is the EU's recent law that kind of gave more teeth to copyright holders to restrict or to prosecute those who illegally sharing content. So moving on to pricing and data caps, the point to make here or takeaway here is that it's still pretty expensive worldwide, and this is kind of using U.S. sort of as a proxy here, and there's some variation as you go around the world, of course, but it's still about $60 a month for a standalone plan, and that could be tied to a USB dongle or what have you, and about $30 a month incremental over the cellular voice subscription. And that can be a pretty big burden for somebody who's upgrading from a feature phone or a smartphone, or a messaging device, to bear if they're interested in what a smartphone has to offer. They still take that the cost component into account, both the cost of the device itself as well as what it's going to, the total cost of ownership over the life of the contract, and that's pretty much standard wherever you are in the world. Folks are still making that decision and making that cost decision also based on what kind of functionality they think they need from the device itself. Tethering, it does exist. It is expensive still, but if you're a lucky owner of an Android device, you can get it for free in some cases. Data caps are a pretty common way for operators to kind of limit the amount of usage that is going across their networks. 5 gigabytes is the typical limit, and you get, there's overage charges if you happen to go over. Really, a very small percentage of mobile subscribers get anywhere close to the 5 gigabyte cap. Much like on fixed networks, I think Comcast's theoretical cap is 250 gigabytes per month. You'd have to be doing some pretty serious data usage to get there on a monthly basis. I think the typical user, I think Cox has released numbers and whatnot that say their average subscribers are using about 7 to 9 or so megabytes or gigabytes per month. But on mobile data networks, it's really a pretty small percentage, and most smartphone users fall within the roughly 200 to 300, 350 megabyte per month data usage category, and that varies a great deal based on what they're doing and travel and those sorts of things. One other important thing to note here, especially given the recent iPad launch, is the advent of prepaid, and maybe advent's not too strong a word since it's been going on for a while. Leap Wireless has been doing pretty well with its prepaid CDMA EVD offerings. I think about 10% or so of their subscriber base use their prepaid data. But what Apple and AT&T and iPad will be doing when the 3G version of the iPad is out in a few weeks is to basically make mobile broadband a lot less risky, a lot less require no really contract, a year or 2 years, what have you. It's just you turn it up 1 month, you either pay, I think it's $15 or $30 for 250 or unlimited access, respectively, and if you don't need it any longer, you don't like it, you just turn it off at the end of the month, and you're done. So it has this type of pricing arrangement does have the potential, depending on how it does, to start to alter how we're paying for mobile broadband. And obviously, in different regions around the world, prepaid prepaid mobile broadband in particular is more used or less used than it is in the U.S. We're predominantly postpaid market, as I think everybody knows. The Sprint wholesale deal is also important to note, and essentially this is somewhat similar to what AT&T and Apple are doing. Essentially, it gives an OEM the ability to basically resell and package 3G connectivity with their devices, or provide it as a promotional incentive or what have you, in terms of a card or something, a stored value card, to customers or whatever the case may be. So that's another. They haven't announced any customers yet, I don't believe, but it's something to keep an eye on as well. And periodically, over the past year or so, I'd say there's been some rumblings in the wireless industry about moving away from kind of the all-you-can-eat for $60 a month up to 5 gigs pricing plans. I think AT&T Wireless and Verizon Wireless have both kind of made some rumbles about going that way. And nobody really likes this idea. I think it's in large part because the industry has done a relatively poor job of educating consumers what it actually means, how much data they're actually consuming, how much data they're likely to consume, and how your particular pricing might, or your particular cost per month might change based on how you're using data. It might end up being less expensive, for example. I don't know if anybody actually knows the answer to that question necessarily, but so far it seems that the tier-based scheme, the usage-based scheme, are pretty much seen in disfavor by a lot of consumers. It's failed pretty miserably on fixed networks, fixed broadband networks, so I think the implication is that it might not do so well on wireless either. And one thing that we haven't seen much of, although we thought we might when Google announced its Android platform, is the advertising subsidized usage or 3G usage. There might be some, with Google's purchase of AdMob, with Apple's purchase of Quattro, it's possible that those two companies in particular are moving in that direction, but that's another kind of wait and see. So in developed markets, just to give a better sense of how device penetration affects bandwidth usage and how we kind of thought about that with regard to the model that we created and the forecast in general. The average iPhone user, and this is obviously going to vary, consumes about 800 megabytes per month. And in terms of our model, that would place them in roughly in the heavy user bracket. And with the launch of the iPad, and we're going to, for the sake of argument, assume that this is the 3G version. Given the capabilities of that device, its video capabilities, the hardware, the screen size, all that stuff, it lends itself toward potentially at least as much usage as the iPhone, perhaps more. But the point I want to make here is that users with both devices probably will not consume twice as much bandwidth on a monthly basis as they had been. There's going to be some basically usage offload between the devices. One way to think about it is when iPod users were buying their first iPhones, it's not like they got the iPhone and all of a sudden they started consuming twice as much music on a monthly basis as they had previously. Another way to think about it is if you buy a third pair of shoes, you're not walking 3 times as far on a daily basis. It's your usage of those devices is being spread across what you own, basically, and to whatever extent that you choose to make that division. If the iPad is better for one particular application, then maybe the data usage associated with that application goes over that device versus your iPhone versus your desktop computer, what have you. And the other key point here is that we believe this pairing, this effect, it's not just an iPhone, iPad thing. The only reason why this example is here is because it's pretty much top of mind given the launch of the iPad recently. But there are new tablets coming out this year, both using Android, Windows Mobile, I think, and Linux as well, I believe. But I think that this usage offload concept would hold equally for those platforms as well. In developing markets, we think it's a little bit different. Just as in the U.S., there's kind of this ongoing battle between the major smartphone operating systems. It's really not clear at this stage which one's going to win out or which ones are going to win out. Symbian is obviously very, very strong globally and not so much in the U.S., and they're in the process of going open source. I think they might actually have finished or are about to finish that process this year. Android, obviously, open. Windows Mobile is kind of reinventing itself toward the end of the year, so they look like they were down and out, but maybe they'll kind of resurrect their market share at some point this year, later in the year. Bada is Samsung's new proprietary OS. We're not really clear where that's going to end up. The initial devices look like they're going to turn up in Asia Pacific and Europe, but we'll have to see about the U.S. And of course, in developing markets as well, it's not really just smartphones. It's more connected netbooks, notebooks, USB dongles that are really driving or contributing to the drive of mobile broadband usage. Another factor to consider as well is that in developing markets, the availability of fixed broadband is not always an option, but it's also not even feasible. In some cases, from a cost perspective, it could be comparatively less expensive to just simply use 3G wireless or 4G wireless, as the case may be. But the point here really is that regardless of what's happening in the device and the OS level, the demand for data is there and it's growing. I was speaking with a gentleman from 3G Americas last week, and he was telling me a little bit about what's happening in the Latin American market, in Brazil and Chile and Mexico, and those are predominantly prepaid markets. But he was making the point that the youth in Brazil, as this bullet point says, they want the same kind of social networking and web connectivity people in the U.S. desire, youth in the U.S. desire. It's just that they're a bit more limited in what they can do because of prepaid and the cost associated with obtaining a smartphone or obtaining data access on a monthly basis. So finally, we get to the numbers. Essentially, in 2010, what we're estimating is that about 131,000 terabytes per month were being transferred over mobile data networks worldwide. We see that growing to about 967,000 terabytes per month by 2014. These are obviously really big numbers, and the growth curve is pretty steep. What's happening essentially is the confluence of everything I've been talking about for the past 20 or so minutes. Current users are doing more. More users are starting to use data. They're coming onto the networks. And there are many more data-consuming devices on the network. And to kind of the iPhone, iPad example, it's not going to be a twofold growth in what those users with multiple devices do, or threefold or fourfold. It's going to be 10, 20, 30% growth or something on top of what they're currently doing. And not all of that traffic, of course, is going to go over 3G. That's why Wi-Fi exists to a large extent, and that kind of is underscored by some of the decisions like AT&T has made in the last couple of years or so in purchasing providing free iPhone access to folks in Starbucks to their Wi-Fi network to kind of offload some of the bandwidth from their network to the Wi-Fi. So kind of the question here is, how did we get at these numbers, given that they're so large? Well, what we did was essentially we leveraged the subscriber forecast that I had mentioned earlier. We have a pretty good sense of how many folks in each markets are using 2G, 3G, and then we created usage profiles based on, how, basically based on kind of the applications that I had talked about earlier, and broke them out into light, medium, heavy, and extreme usage categories. So in the U.S., for example, a light user would be somebody like my wife who uses her smartphone for very limited purposes, email, a little bit of web browsing, checking the weather, that kind of thing when she's online in the bank or whatever. Whereas a more medium, heavy user would be somebody like myself who travels a fair amount, uses email pretty heavily on my device when I am traveling, has a connected laptop, so is using that as well, and is generating about anywhere from that 200 to 300, 350 megabyte per month range. And the more extreme mobile data user would be somebody, at least in our model, on average, would consume about 2 gigabytes of data per month, and that's the heavily connected mobile worker who's traveling all the time, using a lot of corporate apps, VPNing in, sending big PowerPoints or spreadsheets around, or simply a more consumer-type user who's heavily socially connected and is downloading video or streaming video into the computer, on internet radio all the time. The point, again, to make here is that relatively small changes in how users are consuming data or doing certain things on a daily basis, whether if they start downloading internet audio or listening to streaming audio, 30 minutes a day on their mobile phone when they're out for a bike ride or walking or whatever, that can have a pretty big impact on where they fall in terms of overall consumption. And again, that has a big impact on the total amount of data on average that's being passed over the network. So in developing markets, it looks a little bit different than in developed markets such as the U.S. or Europe or Japan, where 3G penetration is pretty high. Smartphone penetration is pretty high. Basically, what's happening is that, or what we see happening is that ongoing 3G rollouts, demand for data is currently strong and is continuing to be strong. Mobile is probably the primary way that a lot of folks will get connected to the internet. And in order to kind of drive that growth, device costs need to drop unsubsidized to probably about the $100 range. Right now, subsidized devices cost about that, at least in the developed markets. And the reason for that is, and to go back to the Latin America example that was kind of discussed with me the other day, was that in a city such as Mexico, or countries such as Mexico, there's a very high prepaid penetration, and operators aren't going to take the risk of subsidizing a high-end smartphone only to have, with local number portability in effect, only to have that subscriber churn away to a different operator within a very short period of time. Doesn't really make financial sense. So postpaid is pretty much, smartphones are pretty much, in those developing regions, are really either postpaid related, or the more affluent individuals in those various regions are buying smartphones and using them. But in terms of growth rates, what this chart here is showing is that it's essentially double what it is in the more developed markets. And that's not to say, of course, that there isn't a great deal of usage already in developed markets. There is. It's the highest in the world pretty much right now. It's just that penetration is already pretty high, and there's just not nearly as many people coming online, so to speak, as there are in the developing regions. So it ends up being that pretty impressive growth curve that I showed a few slides ago. So I think with that, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you for questions.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again, Matt, for the information today and the presentation. And again, everyone, this is Dan Meyer, editor at RCR Wireless News. I want to remind everyone who's on the call that if you have questions, please feel free to use the question function on the GoToWebinar panel, and we will try to get to as many as we can in the next 20 minutes or so. But again, Matt, I want to thank you again for the presentation. And maybe to start out with, there have been a couple of questions kind of asking, with some of the information you've provided, any sort of impact that Wi-Fi might have when it comes to the possibility of offloading data from mobile networks. It does seem like carriers have tried to integrate Wi-Fi more and more, depending on the carrier. But I guess what's the general view of the ability to offload some of this increased demand onto Wi-Fi networks?
Well, I think that's one of the major goals that in general have, especially if somebody's sitting in Starbucks, for example, and is just plugging away on whatever they're doing on their laptop, on their USB dongle connected to the 3G network. What the operator would obviously prefer to do is to have more of that traffic go through the Wi-Fi network, which may or not be their own, in order to kind of relieve that pressure on that cell site. So I think most of the new devices that are coming out offer that have Wi-Fi radios in them and offer that ability to offload. But one of the interesting counterpoints to that is, like with the new Palm Pre and Plus and Pixie Plus, as well as the Evo, they have that mobile hotspot capability built into it, so it's actually allowing Wi-Fi sharing between Wi-Fi connected devices back over the 3G or 4G network, as the case may be, which would seem to put more strain on it. But I think generally speaking, the goal is that operators want to try and leverage Wi-Fi as much as they can.
Gotcha. Do you think that the carriers are doing a good enough job with educating customers perhaps on Wi-Fi? I mean, I know personally, at least, people I know who have iPhones, for instance, rarely, even in their own homes, even turn on the Wi-Fi functionality of the device. It is always relying on the AT&T 3G network, and there's been issues with that. But is the industry or carriers in general, do you think, doing a good enough job at educating customers that when they are in a hotspot to go ahead and flip over to Wi-Fi?
Well, I don't think that they've done a fantastic job to date, and I think that there are still costs associated with, for the consumer. You still have to pay a little bit unless you're a UVerse subscriber, for example, or you're an iPhone owner, in order to access that Wi-Fi network. And maybe that incremental cost is something that consumers aren't terribly interested in paying if they're only going to be in a single location for an hour or two. So I think there needs to be some pricing breaks, perhaps. More incentivized pricing for users to actually get onto that Wi-Fi network and be able to use that connection. Like if I'm an iPhone owner and I'm in a Starbucks, I can get Wi-Fi access on my iPhone, but I can't use it on my laptop. I've got no way to bridge that gap, really. So I think that they might be able to do a little bit better job in that regard as well.
Gotcha. And again, I want to remind everyone listening in that if you do have some questions, please feel free to use the question function on the GoToWebinar panel there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can here. Another question, Matt, kind of related to the last ones on Wi-Fi coming in, where people are wondering about, I guess, the general fit of femtocells when it comes to wireless data too, kind of how those might fit in. It does seem like carriers are, kind of still nibbling around the edges when it comes to femtocell deployments. What's, I guess, your general view or IGR's general view of how femtocells will fit into this?
I think kind of the verdict's out at this stage. I think AT&T just announced at CTIA there was going to be a femtocell deployment for heavy users or something, valuable users, to improve coverage or whatever. I think that we're probably headed in that general femto direction, but I kind of agree with the wording in the question. They're still kind of nibbling around the edges of it, or maybe not quite sure yet how to best leverage it to their advantage.
Yeah. Now, what about I'm not sure how much you dive into the tower side of things, but is there any issues with the infrastructure side about getting enough backhaul to the towers even to support this increased demand? The numbers you were showing, that's huge increases there, and it's one thing to have the network on the front end capable of doing it, but the back end part of it too needs to be seems like it needs to be upgraded. I know some of the carriers are moving in that direction, but what's, I guess, the view of I guess that back end part getting upgraded as well?
Well, I think that's a huge part of it. That the back end really does need to get updated, and in many cases, carriers are already doing that. I think we would probably do a whole webinar on that in and of itself. So.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely seems like that's still an issue to be taken care of. One thing you mentioned earlier too was, consumer usage is definitely expected to increase when it comes to mobile data. But it does seem like too that with all these new apps coming out, a lot of these apps are data heavy, but they're data heavy when they're kind of in the background. Even a lot of these apps, kind of are constantly pinging the network for information that the customer might not need at that second, but if they ever wanted to check it, it's kind of there and ready. Do you see any issues with carriers having to kind of maybe take charge of this, or what's their view of these applications coming out that are maybe taxing the network pretty heavily, and they're just kind of running in the background from a consumer point of view?
Yeah. Well, I guess at this stage, not all smartphone OSs permit that to happen.
Sure.
The application's up and running. But I would say that, generally speaking, that would be where carriers need to move more toward the realm of like deep packet inspection, policy management, bandwidth metering on kind of on the back end. I think Yoda in Russia does a lot of capacity management on the back end. So if they see user usage spiking or different types of usage spiking, then they can throttle it down on an automated basis so that a good network connection is experienced by all the users on that particular cell or on that network. So I'd agree that that's something that needs to get addressed. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, and again, I want to remind people listening in that if you have any questions, please feel free to use the question function on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll have about 10 more minutes here of Q&A with Matt. Matt, again, some more questions coming in when it comes to how carriers are handling this data traffic, mostly around the pricing models. It does seem like with some of the new plans, some of the prepaid plans, like with the iPad plan from AT&T, that consumers or that carriers are getting a little more aggressive when it comes to offering data services to customers at a more reasonable price. Do you see, at least when it comes to 3G networks, are carriers still kind of taking it easy, and maybe with 4G will they perhaps kind of let go of the reins a little bit and let customers be a little more aggressive when it comes to taking advantage of the capabilities of the new devices?
So basically, easing up on pricing in as we know it today, or moving?
Just general pricing now, because like you said in the presentation, I mean, it's still kind of around that $60 a month for the capped level for most carriers, and that does it seems like it's doing well for carriers by keeping not too many customers on the networks, but and if they do want to get on there, they're paying a pretty good price.
Right.
So I guess what's kind of the view of what carriers what they need to do, and if they really want to get much more aggressive, at least right now, the 3G networks with allowing customers to use more data.
Well, I think it's a combination of the more aggressive or innovative type pricing plans that the iPad may or may not be representative of. We'll see
Sure.
how well sales of that particular device do, as well as actual take-up of the 3G plan when it happens. But I mean, just generally speaking, if carriers are looking to drive more mobile bandwidth usage, then certainly lowering price or charging differently on a pricing basis would, all else being equal, would help that. So maybe some different types of rating plans in their billing systems in their back end that would give them a little bit more flexibility in how they're rating and pricing for plans would be one option, as well as just as they upgrade into the more efficient and the higher bandwidth network technologies, they're going to have some natural easing of their constraints in their network.
Sure.
So that might ease up pricing as well.
Yeah, and that almost seems what's happening, at least with Sprint. I think initially right now with their WiMAX network, they're allowing, I think, unlimited data right now for their WiMAX customers, as opposed to the to the capped still for the CDMA network. So, but that's still early. I mean, I think initially when 3G networks rolled out, they were offering unlimited band as well, but then they put the cap in there after a while. So,
well, even to the point earlier about Wi-Fi usage, I think.
Yeah.
AT&T Uverse owners or users, they get free Wi-Fi usage when they're in an AT&T hotspot, and I think a lot of the current data plans permit Wi-Fi usage, bundled into the pricing of the 3G plan itself. So I think more bundling like that might help. Might help users see more value in it, or get better connections when they're in a fixed location or something like that. So
Sure. Looks like we're getting a lot of questions too. Just kind of about I guess the future and the potential for networks to kind of all coalesce around a LTE standard at some point. Do you see any advantage long term? If everyone does go kind of this LTE route, for that to maybe help not just drive adoption of mobile services, but perhaps provide an opportunity for carriers to lower prices, as maybe roaming could be less expensive. The efficiencies of LTE should help out too. But does the future looking at LTE? Do you see that as being both a benefit both for consumers and also for carriers when it comes to mobile data services?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be a long time before we get to that point, obviously, but it's probably 2013, 2014 before Verizon has its network completed. So if probably at the earliest. So it's going to be a while before we kind of get to that that future, so to speak. And I
Sure.
think anything can happen between now and then. So.
Sure, yeah. And I guess I also want to remind everyone again listening in that if you do have some questions, please feel free to use the question function on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll try to get to those. I think we have time here for a few more questions. One question that came in, Matt, was someone was kind of curious about this recent data usage. I mean, it does seem like, at least in maybe more urban areas, that consumers are using data services quite a bit now, and I'm sure usage will continue to grow, but maybe not at such a strong rate as perhaps in more rural or even developing areas. Are carriers prepared to handle these huge increases in data usage when it comes to maybe the more rural areas where usage right now might be pretty low, but is expected to take off at a much greater rate than maybe more urban areas?
Well, I guess I don't know if I can answer that in a just generally.
Without a whole other presentation, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean it's going to vary based on the carrier's capabilities within the given market, what kind of spectrum they hold, where they're positioned in terms of existing deployments, the prices of the devices that are in those that's in that region. Is it smartphone? Is it netbook? Is it connected netbook? Or connected notebook or something like that? Is it tablet? I think that there's kind of a lot of moving parts, and I don't know if I can just say sure or so.
Sure, gotcha. Now, what about with this move to maybe more advanced networks? How important will it be for carriers to make that transition for consumers seamless when using the device? I mean, that's maybe an issue now when it comes to roaming from a 3G network to a Wi-Fi network. But when going forward, like with the new Evo device from Sprint, being able to seamlessly roam between CDMA and then onto to WiMAX network when available, how important will that be to kind of, I guess, keeping consumers interested in mobile data?
Well, first, I think it depends on the application. And second, I think it's pretty important for that handoff to happen essentially invisibly from the consumer experience. So isolate the consumer as much as possible from what's going on in the back end. And if they don't necessarily need to know that the handoff has happened, but they might want to know that they're on a higher speed network and can do more stuff on that network. So, but I think the transition itself should be as seamless and as contain as low latency as possible, just generally speaking. I think a lot of the new standards kind of deliver that, but it's that handoff. I think I would agree that it's important to make that seamless.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like, too, I think when Sprint was announcing that Evo device, that they'd mentioned, like, at least with the YouTube application, that when a consumer's on the WiMAX network, that the application will know and it'll offer up the YouTube HD service as opposed to the regular YouTube service. So kind of taking advantage of that capabilities.
Yeah, and there might be some pricing-based things that they do in that regard as well. If you want a better connection or a better if you want HD, it's a little bit more, generally speaking. Or if you're okay with a more standard resolution, lower resolution, then. But if that's, I don't know if micro payments would necessarily work in that scenario. But maybe this is where we get into the tiered-based pricing or the usage-based pricing, and it's tied to something that's more identifiable to customers than just bandwidth numbers. Sure,
that makes sense. And then it's another question too, kind of on the application side, which is getting a lot of steam. People are asking, I guess what you see as being perhaps the main driver of this huge uptake of data usage. I mean, do you expect it to be just people using the device more, or do you expect mobile video to really take off and perhaps drive a lot of this growth, or I guess what do you see as kind of driving a lot of this uptake in mobile data usage?
I think a lot of it's video.
Okay.
a lot of it is, I'm a big podcast listener, and a lot of those are pretty big files as well. So, and if I can get them direct onto my device rather than having to sideload, I'll do it. So, but I think a lot of it is video. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, it does seem like that's what people are kind of waiting for. Is once the networks are there, I think the video part of it can probably take off. Streaming movies and whatnot to devices.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, see what happens there. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the question function there on the GoToWebinar screen. I think we might have time for perhaps one more question here. It does look like we are getting a lot of questions on the network side of things too. Not sure how familiar research is going into onto the DAS side of things, the distributed antenna systems. Do you guys see any sort of increase in the use of DAS systems when it comes to perhaps carriers beefing up their networks to handle this increased traffic?
Well, I think carriers in general are going to kind of use those solutions that they think will best increase the capacity of the networks in particular areas. But I don't know if I want to get too far into that topic. It's another presentation there probably. Yeah. But it does seem like a lot of questions coming in, kind of along those lines of whether it's femto cells, whether it's a DAS system, whether it's Wi-Fi. The ability for carriers to at some point perhaps offload some of this traffic when they can, or beef up the back end there. So it does seem like that's and like you were saying earlier, that's a whole different issue that needs to be definitely addressed by the carriers when it comes to that. So, let me see if we got any more questions here that we can go on with. I guess maybe kind of going back to the Wi-Fi front. One final question is, will once these 4G networks come online, will the need for Wi-Fi perhaps fall to the wayside? If the capacity of these LTE networks are up there, will you even need Wi-Fi as a backup, kind of moving forward? I don't necessarily see Wi-Fi going away.
Okay.
Especially within the home.
Yeah.
It's a seamless transition from, just open my laptop up and I'm on Wi-Fi. If that does end up happening, then it's further out than I can foresee. And if I could, then I'd probably be a pretty rich man at this point.
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good. Well, again, those were, I think it looks like most of the questions there. Again, we're kind of getting close to the time limit here, too. But again, I wanted to thank Matt again for the presentation today. And to all the listeners, if you do have questions, please feel free to send some more in. We can try to get to those offline at some point after the presentation's over. And again, there will be a copy of this presentation that you can download from the RCR Wireless News website. We'll be sending out a link to that after the webinar here, so you can get a copy of that. And again, I wanted to thank Matt again for the time today, Matt, in his presentation. And thanks everyone for listening in. And again, like I said, please feel free to keep sending the questions. We'll try to get to those. And hopefully we'll listen to everybody on the next presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Bye-bye.